Hi, I'm going to start this one. We've got something light, general knowledge.
Europe. One continent, 44 countries, according to the UN, and 746 million people. The United States are
It's a
part
lot
of
of
North
people.
America, only one country with 329 million people, less than half of Europe. The United States are often compared to the European Union or Europe as a whole a lot of times. So in this video I thought it would be interesting to take a look at a few indicators and check how it is that they in fact compare. We've already covered a few of the basics, amount of countries and population, but what about size? The United States have an area of around 9.8 million square kilometers, while Europe has a size of around 10.5 million. Although this can
Similar.
vary depending on which limits you attribute to the continent. So now that we've covered all of those basics, let's jump into a few specific indicators and find out how the two compare.
Okay, he made an important note that he's talking about all of Europe, not just the EU, which I think would have only been 27 or 28 countries.
First, comparing the latitude. It's very interesting to see the overlay of the European cities on top of the US territory and vice versa. For instance, as stupid as it may sound, I had no idea Reykjavik was as further north as northern Canada. The same applies to Oslo. It makes sense that Portuguese and Spanish cities are on the same level as California, at least climate-wise, but it's weird, for instance, that Ankara is at the same level as Delaware. For some reason, I always thought it was so much further south. It's also strange to see that Los Angeles is on the same latitude as Algeria in North Africa, or that New York is at the same latitude as Azerbaijan. Speaking of Portugal, Spain...
Can't say I ever thought of what it would look like to overlay a map of Europe onto the United States, and I guess part of Canada as well. But good to know, in case that ever comes up in conversation.
In California, how do the US and Europe compare when it comes to the hours of sunlight they get every year? Through this map, we understand that the Southwest USA gets more hours of sun than anywhere in Europe, over 3,500 a year. And unlike Europe, there's nowhere in the US that gets less than 1,800 hours of sun, as is the...
So California, Nevada, southern Utah, all of Arizona, some of New Mexico, and a tiny piece of Texas get the most sunlight. And then I guess Arizona, or not Arizona, excuse me, Hawaii and Alaska didn't make the cut because they're not shown here. So just contiguous US. And then over in Europe, the closest weather would be Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Greece. What are those two? Croatia and the tip of Albania. That checks out. This video is already testing my ability to identify places on a map, so correct me if I'm wrong. But France is giving range. Every color is present.
Case in many areas of Europe, those in light green, blue, and dark blue. It's also odd, at least to me who isn't an expert on this matter, how the amount of hours of sun isn't directly related to the latitude of the region. I always assume that the closer to the equator you are, the more hours of sun you get, but we can see on this map that this isn't the case at all, even though we can tell that usually southern areas get more sun. If you know which other factors determine hours of sun, let me know in the comments. Another interesting topic is human development. The United States and Europe are arguably two of the most developed areas of the world. This map compares the Human Development Index of each US state and each European country. In case you don't know, the HDI is calculated as the geometric mean of life expectancy, education, and gross national income per capita. Assuming that those indicators are representative of the quality of life of people, it seeks to measure...
There's such a divide between Western and Eastern Europe. And then Hawaii and Alaska have entered the chat for this one. Mississippi people weigh
precisely that. In the United States, there's only one state that doesn't make it into the top 3 HDI categories, Mississippi. When we look at Europe, only a handful of countries are in the top ranking: Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Ireland, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland. And when you look at Eastern Europe, these levels go significantly down, with many countries in the lowest category, such as Ukraine, Turkey, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Albania, and North Macedonia. In Western Europe, Portugal is the only country who isn't in the top 3 levels of HDI. A somewhat subjective comparison of these two areas is also depicted in this other map. This is based in a 2014 Pew Research Center poll. It's almost 10 years old, so the data might be somewhat outdated and no longer valid. Always keep that in mind for these types of videos where data and maps are presented. The data might not be 100% right, and it might be outdated. But in this one, people were asked if they are absolutely certain of God's existence. And the comparison of the results between the US and Europe is astonishing.
The dark blue on the United States chart makes sense. A lot of those states could be considered the Bible Belt, although I think Texas is part of the Bible Belt too. And I thought Florida also had piece of it in the Bible Belt. But interesting because I would have assumed, well, there are way more churches in Europe, I think, than there are in the United States. But it's likely that a good amount of those churches were built before the United States even became a country. And the presence of an old church, of course, does not mean absolute certainty that there is a God. Interesting phrasing on that, though. I'm not too sure if that gives a great idea of the spiritual landscape in each place. Like, how would the answers have differed if they were to ask, do you believe in a higher power? Or are you spiritual? But the year also matters on this, I think. This video is 2 years old. He said his data is 10 years old. I would assume that in the past decade plus, the amount of people who identify as agnostic or atheist has increased. I'll check to see if Pew has an updated study and link what I find in the resources.
The majority of US states have over 50% of people being certain of God's existence, some even surpassing 70%, those in dark blue. Only Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts have results under 50%, while most of Europe is much less certain in their belief of God. Most of the continent is in yellow, with only 10 to 29% being certain of their belief. Portugal, Poland, Slovakia, Lithuania, and Ukraine, along with Bulgaria, go up to 30 or 49%, but still not reaching over half of the population. The rest of the Balkans is more religious, but it's only Georgia and Armenia who reach the dark blue level. There's a few countries missing from this map, those in gray. If you have any idea of how religious they are, leave a comment below. Another interesting thing we can compare are age restrictions in the US and Europe. Age restrictions can be applied to driving, voting, tobacco, or alcohol purchases. Many of these change often, so be aware these might not be correct at the moment you watch. When it comes to driving, the US government allows people to drive at a much younger age. In South Dakota, it says you can drive at 14 years and 6 months. That's kind of crazy if it's true. The oldest driving age in the US seems to be New Jersey at 17. While in Europe, the vast majority of countries has a 18 years minimum driving age. Only the UK, Iceland, Hungary, and Georgia have lowered it to 17. When it comes,
I wonder if the states where you can drive younger has to do with the farming sector. If your parents have a farm, you might be driving a tractor or I don't know, a backhoe. Either that or lot size might play a part too. You can buy more property in South Dakota than you could in Florida for the same price. So maybe you're driving on your own property. Or if you live in a small town and the nearest school is 2 towns over, there's not much public transportation, your parents have to work, maybe you drive yourself to school. That's all I can think. If you're from any of those places,
to voting,
weigh in.
18 is common all around. Only in Europe are there 2 countries that differ, Austria at 16 and Greece at 17, although I'm not sure if these limits are the same for all types of elections. Tobacco purchase is technically only allowed over 21 in all of the US, while in Europe you can buy it at 18. Alcohol purchasing is also forbidden for people under 21 all across the United States, with the limit ages varying a lot across Europe, but none being higher than 18 or 20, although again this also varies depending on the type of alcohol. For instance, in Portugal, I think you can buy beer or wine as long as you're over 18, but other drinks do have a 20-year age limit, I think. When it comes to
I like that if they go by alcohol percentage. Also, anecdotally, I've traveled to way more countries in Europe than states in the United States, but I've noticed that people smoke more in Europe. For example, if you're in a patio of a restaurant, eating outside in Spain or France, it's not uncommon to see people smoking there. But if you go to California, many patios ban smoking. So I wonder if the amount of people smoking in each place has to do with the age you're allowed to
Comparison
start.
between military, for instance, it's a difficult comparison to make.
Or it's
According
just
to
cultural.
Wikipedia, the US Army has a personnel of around 1 million, counting active troops, reserves, and National Guard. And according to this 2018 article from Business Insider, the top 5 strongest militaries in Europe, all of these maps exclude Russia, are France with 390,000, the UK 280, Italy 267, Germany 200, and Spain 175. Together, these
But all of these countries in Europe, France, UK, Italy, Germany, Spain, are part of NATO.
alone would surpass the US Army, although you'd still
Ally.
need to take into account the material advantage of the US. Ships, intelligence, tanks, planes, investment, and in these the US has a considerable advantage, as we can see from this graph depicting the investment comparisons. But thankfully most of Europe and the US are
The
allied.
United States spends more on defense than the next 9 countries combined. China, India, United Kingdom, Russia, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and South
are
Korea.
allied through NATO, so a comparison isn't needed because in the event of a conflict, it is very likely they would be on the same side. And what about an economic comparison? The United States and the European Union are the 2 largest economies globally in nominal terms. In recent years, only in 2011 did the European Union have a higher GDP than the US. Keep in mind this excludes non-EU Europe. The US's GDP per capita is 63,000, while in the EU it's 33. But keep in mind both of these are on average. There are EU countries and US states with higher and lower values. Also, as we can see from these maps, the US's GDP is mostly carried by California, Texas, Florida, and New York, while Europe's is mostly carried by France, Germany, the UK, Spain, and Italy. When it comes to currency comparison, as I make this video, 1 euro equals $1.07. The euro's value has been higher and recently its value has decreased a little, approaching parity with the dollar. As we can see from this graph, there was only a short period in the early 2000s when the euro was worth less than the dollar, and there was a point where it was almost worth 50% more. Recently things have stabilized and they're almost worth the same, but with Croatia joining the European currency next year, it might go up again. Also keep in mind not all of Europe and not even all of the EU use the euro as their currency. Another interesting point to compare is the percentage of young people aged 18 to 34 that still live in their family's home, meaning in most cases they do not yet have the financial stability to live on their own. Both of these maps have data from 2015, but from the most recent information I could find about this, the numbers haven't changed a lot. In Europe, Nordic countries have very low values. They're also the highest income areas, so it makes sense people can more easily afford to live on their own, but it might also have to do with the cultural element. In Southern Europe, the amount of young people still living at home is tremendous, 44% in Portugal, 37% in Spain, and 46% in Italy, for instance, while Greece, Bulgaria, and Slovakia are all above 50%. In the US, values are equally as high, with the difference being that there are no states at all below 10%. The lowest value is 14 in North Dakota, and the highest being in New Jersey with 46, although none surpass 50%. These high values are usually connected with the fact that salaries do not pay enough and the cost of living is way too high, both due to rising prices, inflation.
These 2 charts aren't a direct comparison though. If you look on the left, the United States chart, millennials living at home, and then under that it says percentage of adults aged 18 to 34 living at parents' home. That's 2015. And then on the right, we have share of young people aged 25 to 34 living with parents. But if you take into account that in the United States, there's this push to go to college of whatever type, community college, trade school, university, it is probably more likely that these 18 to 4-year degree or 6-year degree, 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds live at home while they study, which kind of skews the comparison here if you start Europe with 25 to 34. But if it gives a general gist, I agree with him, it could be cultural.
And also other factors. So that is how the United States and Europe compare in a number of indicators and interesting aspects. There's a lot of things you can compare the two in. If you know of any more, leave a comment and I can always make a part 2 of this. It's always difficult to be fair in these comparisons. After all, the United States are a single country and Europe has around 44. But if you take into account that the US are a federal state consisting of 50 states, the comparison makes a little more sense, especially when the size of the two is similar. As we can see on this interactive map, the size of the US over Europe is pretty close, and as you saw in the beginning, the number of square kilometers are pretty close as well. In many ways they are similar, but in so many other big differences are visible, many of which signifying a great difference in the way that people live their life and the quality that life has. Thanks so much for watching this video. Subscribe if you want to catch future videos, and leave a comment below with your opinions. I will see you next time for more general knowledge.
Okay, that was another one from General Knowledge, whose channel I will link down below along with this specific video because I know some of the maps were a bit hard to see. And if you like content like this, he has a lot of it, so worth checking out. I get a lot of requests to watch the Europe versus USA videos in general. I've said before, I've lived in them both. I like them both. I like that there are different ways of life in different countries. And I've never been to a country that I didn't think had pros and cons. But like he was saying, I think if any of these maps interested you, it's probably best to do your own research and leave room for the possibility that the polls or maps were out of date. If you have anything you want to correct, feel free to do that. And I'd like to see videos on other continents. Not so much Antarctica, no offense to the researchers, but South America, Africa, Asia, Oceania. So if you have any ideas, let me know. This one's somewhat fitting. I listened to this audio book, or actually it's a short story on audio on Monday, so a couple of days ago now. And it's The Irritated People by Ray Bradbury. And like most Bradbury books and stories, it's set in this futuristic universe in which the president of the USA is engaging in this war with what is referred to as a tri-state union, and that happens to be modern-day Europe. Except the tactics of this war are purely psychological and unconventional. The enemy's throwing confetti, there's EDM playing with heavy bass constantly to annoy people. It is funny, but it also had a message there. It's only about 40, 50 minutes, I can't remember exactly. Under an hour for sure. I'll link you the YouTube channel that I watched it on, or listened to it on. And if you rather the physical book, I'll find you the series that it's a part of. Instead of one recommendation, I'm going to ask for two today. One from a musician or band from the States, another from any country in Europe, any language is fine, any genre. I'm going to start with one from Spain. The band is called Las Grecas, in what is likely their most popular song, Te estoy amando locamente. And this is a musical duo from Madrid. They're sisters. They were making flamenco rock in the 70s. If you're interested in reading about individual bands, this is a good one because they have a lot of lore, to say the least. And then for the choice from United States, easy. I've been listening to this song on repeat, Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac. Over on Patreon, we watched a live version of Dreams by the same band, and then got into the lyrics and what that song actually meant. And it turns out that Stevie Nicks wrote Dreams as a response to Lindsey Buckingham writing Go Your Own Way after the couple were breaking up during their time in the band. And now I can't stop listening to the two songs back to back, so leave your recommendations. That's all I have. Thanks for watching with me. Leave your thoughts on this one, and I'll see you next time.